Thank you, Mackenzie. You did a good job. That's terrible. I'm sorry. I shouldn't compliment you in church. It makes you embarrassed. Well, I was. First of all, I should say, excuse me. I just got new glasses, and so now I'm like fiddling around trying to find the perfect one so I can actually see what I'm doing. It doesn't work. I am at that age where none of them completely work. I went to sorry, I'm getting off track here already, and I haven't even begun the sermon. But I went to the optometrist, right, and got my eye exam, and he says, "Oh yeah, you have a little cataract in there starting to form." And this is the way it goes, right? You can see them like 20 years before they get to be a problem. He says, eventually, you'll get to the point where the glasses won't do you any good anymore, and then you'll have to have it out. And I'm thinking, I know that's a normal part of aging, right? This happens to people, but it's weird to think about this cataract just in there, in my eye, growing for the next 20 years until it gets to be a burden, Why did you tell me? There's nothing I can do about this. Well, I was kicking around for a prayer for today's service, and I sort of accidentally stumbled on something that I thought explained the passage from Romans rather well. It's this Scottish blessing that goes like this. If there is righteousness in the heart, there will be beauty in the character. If there is beauty in the character, there will be harmony in the home. If there is harmony in the home, there will be order in the nation. If there is order in the nation, there will be peace in the world. So may it be. Now, that's what that last little bit there is what we mean when we say amen, right? Let it be so. It's the literal meaning of amen, after all of our prayers. But this is, I think, kind of what Paul is talking about in this passage that we read this morning. He starts with this idea that Christian love should be genuine, without hypocrisy. And in case you've never heard this before, hypocrites in the ancient world were the actors. And the actors wore masks to represent their feelings. That's where we get those, the theater, it gets the happy face and the sad face, that symbol from. And so, in a sense, they thought about this as this kind of stylized lying. I'm going to show you this happy face when I'm not necessarily happy at all, or sad face. And Paul says, take that mask off and love genuinely without having to pretend like you're loving someone, without doing it because you think that's your duty to do it. Let it be genuine. And from that idea flows the rest of all of these many directions and exhortations that he has in this passage. Now, we're not going to go into all these instructions that he gives us, and nor should we. The basic idea is that when Christians love one another genuinely, their relationships are rightly arranged. And the peace and love that just sort of radiate out from there go out to change the world around them. So when your love for one another is genuine, you want, for example, you want the very best for them, and you hate anything and everything that would do them harm. Now think Mama Grizzly here, Mama Grizzly Bear, right? Mama, would you put up for very long with something that threatened your kids?
No.
No, absolutely not, right?
Right.
The most dangerous place in the world is to be between you and your kids, right? Yeah. And so it's not good enough to just be good in the world, right? Because that doesn't take care of it all. You have to, if you're going to stay on the good side of the ledger, you have to actively hate what is evil, those things that would do us harm, Paul says. Just like a mother hates all those things that would threaten her kids or bring them down. And if you genuinely love one another, you do it with mutual affection and by showing one another honor, right? Love is not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. And you show one another honor, you treat one another right. Like I said last week, love is kind of how you put meat on the bones of the Christian faith. Honor is very important. Respect is basically what Paul means here. And we'll come back to that in a minute. But shared faith is also important. You have to have zeal, ardency, which is kind of another word for zeal. Service to God. You share your service to God. You rejoice in hope. So when someone in your community has hope, you take joy in that. And I think about this with watching the Kayleys go off to college. And that's this new adventure for them, this new life. They're getting out on their own as adults, kind of. And it made me so happy to see, right? That's rejoicing in hope. You have to have patience, perseverance. You have to be willing to stick with one another. You have to be willing to contribute when somebody is down. If somebody in this congregation lost their home to a fire or to a flood, would you be there right away? Right? With your checkbook out, maybe a casserole in hand to take care of them? You bet, right? We'd like to think that we'd take care of one another. I'm getting lots of blank looks here. Maybe that's not the case, right? But in theory, yeah, we'd be there for one another. And we have to show hospitality. We have to welcome people not just into the church, but into our very hearts. That's what it means to be a Christian. And so it goes from there. Once your immediate relationships are sorted out, once you have those kind of strengthened, you can figure out how to live peaceably, even with your enemies, right? If you have good relationships in here, it teaches you how to have good relationships out there, even when those relationships are difficult. It helps you to stand in solidarity with the poor, the powerless, the people who are suffering. You can set this kind of good example for the world. And by doing that, you testify to the power of Christ and his good news. Not by demanding conversion from other people, not by going up to people and saying, "Will you come to my church with me?" But just by the example that you set in your life. And there was an Irish saint I read about also when I was looking around for this prayer. Saint Ita. And Ita was a nun who ran a school and had very famous students. But they say that Ita taught faith in God with purity of heart, simplicity of life with religion, and generosity with love. And I think that's what Paul is getting at here too. Have faith in God with a single heart. Be focused on that. Live a simple life and practice your religion. And be generous, not just in giving, but generous in the love that you give out to other people. Be generous with yourself. And amazing things can result if you follow through on that. You can find it in yourself to give up on the need for vengeance. You don't have to get back at somebody who's done you wrong. And you can even change your enemies sometimes. Now, the kind of people who take those ideas really seriously, most seriously, are Quakers and Mennonites. The Quakers often talk about be the peace that you want to see in the world, right? And so they try to live very peaceable lives, not just out there in making peace between warring nations, but between one another. The Mennonites like to talk about Dirk Willems, who was an early Dutch Mennonite, back in a time when they were very much oppressed for their faith. And the story goes that Dirk Willems escaped from jail just before he was to be put to death, and ran off from his prison with the jailer in hot pursuit. And they go out across a frozen lake, and the jailer slips on some thin ice and goes through. And Dirk Willems, stops, turns around, and lifts his jailer out of the pond, the lake, and saves his life. Right? And you know what happened to Dirk Willems? They burned him at the stake. Right? It doesn't always work, but the Mennonites say you gotta try. You have to be the kind of person who would try that, even knowing that it might cost you your life. People don't get it right. None of us get it right all the time. The Quakers don't get it right. The Mennonites don't get it right. We don't get it right. It is easy to change the world. It is hard to change ourselves. Christians get stuck, like 100 times a day. We get stuck on one of the very first steps in that process. Outdo one another in showing honor. If you are, we got to show honor to one another. We got to show respect to one another all the time. And if you're not kind of slumping down in your seat a little bit at hearing that, you probably should be, right? Because you are a sinner. You're all sinners. And so am I, right? We all mess up. We all fail to show one another the honor and the respect that each other deserve. And how are you going to change the world if you can't be nice to one another? How are you going to get people to do the right thing if you can't be bothered to cut them some slack and do the right thing yourself? What do they say? You got to be the change that you want to see in the world. You got to be the peace that you see in the world. And that's the point of saying, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, live in harmony with one another. Don't be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Don't claim to be wiser than you are. You got to keep in mind all the time that, boy, I have goofed up many times in my life, and I need people to cut me slack, and I need to do that for somebody else. And that's not easy when they're really irritating you again and again and again. And let's not kid ourselves. We irritate one another again and again and again, even in the church, don't we? We Christians get ourselves into more trouble by overestimating our importance and how we deserve to be treated. I'll give you an example. I mean, marriage is just chock full of these examples, right? When we moved to Washington County, for the first time in a long time, we had a garage there, right? And not long after we move in, Jen backs out of the garage and takes the side mirror off of my newish car. And she's just going, oh well, things happen. And I'm going, you broke my car. Take this seriously. How could you do this? Don't be stupid. Guess what I did 2 weeks later?
Took the other.
I did the same thing. Right? Oh boy, that's a come down. I guess I'm as big an idiot as I think you are. Those of you who are married know how this goes, right? You think, well, my spouse, my husband, my wife, they should know better than to do this to me. They know this pushes my buttons. They know this really irritates me or insults me. Why would you do that to me knowing that? And you get all kind of puffed up and angry, and you feel threatened, and you feel like you got to respond to this somehow. And you get, if you get too attached to that, you get locked into this cycle of anger. It's like, if that gets too hard, it gets to be like a cancer within you. I knew a family, and the oldest son was not particularly good at listening to instructions. So we were at this festival one time, and he's got this little squirt gun. And his parents are saying, don't squirt people with this. And he squirts me. And I said, don't squirt me, with this. That's not nice. And the grandparents are sitting there. And he squirts Grandpa. And Grandpa gets so angry with this that he storms off. Sort of barks at the kid and stomps off and ruins the night for everybody. And I thought, wow. Talk about being anger locked, right? You can't let go of a kid, who's 6, 7, not listening. Because that's what kids do. When you can give up on that stuff, you find freedom in giving up what you're entitled to for the benefit of the other. And if you're a parent, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes you just have to say the kid's demands come before mine, even though it's not fair. And you find when you give up on that stuff, you find freedom to live your best life, freedom to live in kind of a better world, freedom to live out the mission that God has called you to be the peace you want to see in the world, to create the peace that you want to see in the world, from our homes all the way around the world. So let us cut one another some slack, let us show one another some respect, and just let that ripple out into the world. So might it be. Amen.